Good morning, everyone. Hopefully, yes, good. I hope you all had a good time last night in the bar. I did. It was very nice catching up with people that I haven't seen for a whole year, which is always a treat. So, yeah, it's lovely. And this morning, you have a fantastic treat. It's lovely how all the actors are sort of in awe of this next group of people because they're the ones that actually do deal with space. They're the ones that actually are connected to astronauts and know lots and lots of things. So all the actors like to sit with them and have conversations at breakfast so they can, wow, it's fantastic. So I hope you recognize the rocket that I was doing, or the satellite, in homage for this lovely group of people that are going to be coming out here. And they're fascinating, and you're here to hear them, so I'm going to get them on stage and get out of here. But these people, they specialize in space. All sorts of space, in the back of your closet, under your bed, in your basement, and in the sky. So please, ladies and gentlemen, welcome the European Space Agency. Come on out.
Wow. Is this thing on? It's a good turnout, yeah. All right. See, so good morning, everybody. Thank you for turning up so early and dragging yourselves out of bed to come see us. So, as Laurie very kindly said, we are the European Space Agency. We're from all different, thank you. We're from all different bits of the agency, and we've got all different responsibilities. As you've maybe seen at our stand this weekend, we do an awful lot of stuff to do with space, and we'd love to hear your questions today. But first of all, I think we're going to introduce ourselves, and I'm going to ask everyone a question. But I'm going to start off. My name's Tom Ormston. I work in space operations in Darmstadt, just a couple of hours south of here. I used to work on the Mars Express mission, but since then I've come to Earth observation, looking back at our planet, and it's my favorite planet. It's really nice here. So that's my job. And the question I want to ask everybody is, we've had a lot of you come and visit our stand today, the last 2 days, and we've had some great interactions with you. And I just want to know from each person what one of your favorites was, what one of your favorite visitors to our stand was. So I'm going to start over here with Cassie.
Hi, everyone. My name's Cassie Sturman. I work at ESA Tech in Noordwijk, the Netherlands. My background is in planetary science. I was studying Mars and the Martian cryosphere for several years, but like Thomas, I've moved to Earth more recently. It's also a planet. Planetary scientists forget this sometimes. But my background is geology, geophysics, so I really see things from the planetary perspective. As for the booth, I had a lot of really good conversations. I really like when people ask me about Mars. I really like when people listen to me talk about rocks, because space is more than stars and black holes. There's also these rocky bodies all over the place, and that's what I'm all about. But the interactions that get me the most excited, I think, are when kids come to visit, because I think kids have a natural curiosity for space that just has no filters, right? They're not afraid to ask the silliest questions. They get excited about the most basic parts of science that I find really inspiring.
Thank you very much. I realized I forgot to mention my favorite interaction on the stand so far. Actually, it was probably about 2 years ago, and I'm going to embarrass Corinna, who's at the end of the panel here, because she came to our stand 2 years ago and asked, what about the European Space Agency? And she was finishing university, and we said, well, you can come and work for us. We are crazy people, but you can come and work for us. And 2 years later, she's sitting up here on stage with us, so that's my favorite.
Hello everyone, my name is Armel Lubot. I've been working at the agency for something like 15 years, I think. I joined just after finishing my studies, 6 months before the Rosetta launch on the Rosetta mission, which I followed till the end. I guess that kind of makes me the belter of the team. Yeah. And when that finished, I moved up to the cluster mission around Earth, and now I'm around Mars with the TraceCast orbiter mission. My favorite interaction, well, like Cassie, it's with kids because they're just fabulous. There was this little girl which came yesterday. I don't know how old she was, but something like 5 or 6, and she just told to me, I want to work in space, what should I do? And yeah, that was just fabulous. Yeah? Kids, they just don't bother, they just ask the question. The important stuff.
Good morning, my name is Chris White. I also work on the ExoMars TraceCast orbiter. I'm a spacecraft operations engineer on the flight control team, and I look after the guidance and navigation and control subsystem. So I am the GNC SOE on the TGO FCT. And my favorite interaction, the favorite thing for me at the stand is the costumes, the people that show up in the awesome costumes. There was a really good Vorlon who showed up yesterday. Top marks for them.
Well, good morning, everybody. My name is Jana Mulacheva. Unlike my colleagues, I'm only working in ESA to resolve problems and foresee future problems. And believe it or not, the title is called Product Assurance Representative. So I work with the European Space Operations Center as a product assurance representative. Seemingly boring job, but as a result of constantly resolving problems, talking to everybody about them is therapy for me. So all of you are my favorite guests to the stand all the time. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Simon Wood. I'm a spacecraft operations engineer on the Mars Express flight control team, the mission that we've been in space 16 years last week. So, yeah, still going. I'm responsible for the onboard computer systems and the lander relay operations that we do with the rovers on the surface. In terms of the stuff we've been getting at the stand, I mean, I have to say, I think the questions that we've been getting this year have been really, really good. I mean, it's usually pretty decent across the board in the years we've been here before, but this year's been particularly good. Even down to the point of somebody coming up and asking a really specific questions about the batteries on board Mars Express. Apparently they were doing a lot of research into lithium-ion batteries, and as bizarrely as it would be that we are literally just in the middle of trying to understand how our batteries are going to age. So yeah, that turned out to be quite a useful conversation.
Hi, I'm Corinna Vatteroth. As Tom already said, I've been to FedCon a lot, so this is my 10th FedCon. And 2 years ago, so 2 years ago I asked how I could be part of ESA, and now I am, so hi from this side. I actually studied computer science, and I'm now working with the mission control system. That's the software we use to actually communicate with the satellite. So we're getting data from the satellite, and we're sending data back up again, and we do some checks. It's very complex. And we're building a new one because the old one is old, and we need a new one. Yeah, and I'm looking into that, testing that for my section, which is actually Earth observation as well. So, yeah. At the stand, I really like, well, the enthusiastic people, which is basically everyone, but there's people who don't know a lot about what ESA does, and when we just tell them the basics, they're very excited, and that's so very cool, because we are also excited, but sometimes, well, I at least forget that it's really cool to work for ESA. We're like actually putting satellites into space, and sometimes you forget when you're just doing things at your computer and nothing's working. So that reminds me at least that it's really, really cool to be here, so yeah, that's nice.
So I think that's enough from us for now. I hope that there's some people out there that have got some good questions if you've got your thinking caps on at this time in the morning. So I think we've told that a light will shine on the people that have the good questions. There we go.
I heard there were 4 lights, actually.
We're always very careful in space.
Good morning. It's awesome to have you here. Thank you for being here and on the main stage.
Thank you. We can't believe it either.
So let's start with some science fiction going to science question. There's a lot of fuss about Mars and going to Mars and having a moon base and stuff. And I'm pretty sure you know about the TV show Mars from National Geographic. And they had a fabulous second season, in my opinion. But there are a lot of discussions how realistic this kind of show is and how close it is to science. Can you say something about this? Or maybe not.
Have you seen it?
So I think a lot of us are unfamiliar with the show. Like, which one of us? Raise your hand if you've
I
seen the
have
show.
seen
Okay.
it. I watched it. Well, yes, I can confirm. I watched the second season recently. I can confirm that there is currently this sense of fear that the commercial space business might turn sour in that way, but I don't believe it ultimately will. It is a fear, it is a risk that has to be addressed, but we do not think that humanity is so toxic, hopefully.
I have a question. Can you tell us a bit about the show, like just so maybe I can speak to it?
Well, the second season is like, especially the how commercial companies are going to Mars. That's one aspect, but then there's this search for viruses and life on Mars, and they discover 2 different viruses, and the crew gets infected, and they need not this high special treatments, but simple medications and stuff, kind of this, and they try to have different storylines. Well, one main thing is the commercializing of Mars, but then there's this: if there's life on Mars, how dangerous is it to live there or bring it back to Earth? Should there be a space lab around Earth to study life on Mars, bacteria, and kind of this? And I'm not sure how possible this is. The show Mars is very great because it's like a half documentary and half sci-fi show. So they do interviews with NASA and other guys from SpaceX and so on, and what is possible, and it's a good mixture.
Yeah. I mean, I watched the first season. It's got a lot of attention to detail, certainly that. I mean, actually, one of the interesting bits with it was they touched on the psychological effects of actually sending astronauts to another to Mars, and I mean that has been something that's one of the differences going to Mars compared to going to the Moon. And then there's this idea that if you send the kind of stereotypical kind of gung-ho, let's go exploring people, that they'll go nuts because you're completely cut off. In some respects, the comment was, there was a documentary I saw a while back that was suggesting that the ideal astronauts would be the people that will just sit in a corner with a book and not want to talk to anybody, because the psychological effect of just basically seeing the Earth just disappear into a just dot in the sky is completely different to going to the Moon, where you can look out the window and see it the entire time. And so, that was certainly the fact that they played on that in the first series was pretty good.
That actually, in the second season, there is a relationship that is very heavily influenced by the will to return back to Earth, and then there's some back and forth. It is very well depicted, though I found some of the basic inputs into the story rather preposterous, but the relationship was portrayed rather realistically, in my opinion.
Okay, thanks a lot.
Thank you.
Good morning. First, I'd like to thank you. Last year, I made an interview with one of us for my primary school class, and they liked it very much, and I was a hero because I could talk to someone who actually worked with space things, so thank you. But my question is, have one of you ever met a member of the Flat Earth Society, and how does it go?
I hear they have members all around the globe.
Yes.
No one's talking about the Flat Mars Society. That's.
We did actually get our Twitter feed hacked once, and someone put on it, the Earth is flat and Mars is not real. And our Twitter guys were really upset when they saw it, and they thought we delete it. And we're like, no, we can be more clever. They tweeted in the morning, I just had a horrible dream. I thought that was good comms there. But personally, I've not met them. I've seen a lot of videos on YouTube, and they're entertaining for sure. I think for us it's just so hard to even comprehend how you could think that, which makes it very difficult.
Well, I think part of the issue is also that I've had discussions with a few of them over the internet, things that you should never do because there's no
All the best discussions are on the internet.
Yeah, exactly. Someone was wrong on the internet. But I basically came to the conclusion that you cannot talk to these people because they don't listen to your answer. They just come with something else. Whatever you answer to them to try to prove how things are, they will turn it in a way that there's just no end to this discussion. So now I just ignore.
You're part of the conspiracy.
Yeah, pretty
Obviously.
much. Yeah. I think we would literally be the worst people in the world at trying to hide a secret like the Earth is flat, I think. Imagine the meetings. But I mean, I think it kind of splits into two parts. You've got the people who don't want to be, don't want to listen, and then there are the few that kind of have read something and got the wrong end of the stick because some of the stuff is complicated, and you try to explain it, but if they don't want to listen, then they don't want to listen.
Thank you.
Hello.
Hello.
First, thank you for being here. Second, we've all heard about the differences American scientific agencies have at the moment with policies and stuff. Do you feel any kind of pressure from outside, or can you go on as usual?
Well, I mean, there's the shadowy intergovernmental conspiracy to hide the thing about life on Mars, but other than that, it's...
No, I'd say for that one, we're quite lucky actually with the European Space Agency. We have a lot of different politics. We've got 22 member states, and they have plenty of politics just talking amongst each other about what we should do in Europe to bother fighting anybody else. But luckily, as with a lot of things here in Europe, it works very well. We're very cooperative. I mean, we're lots of countries all packed together, so we've had to learn to be cooperative. So we actually do work very comfortably with agencies all around the world. We work with the US, with Russia, with Japan, India, China. So that's one of the things actually that I really appreciate working for ESA, is that compared to certain agencies where we're not affected so much by the ebbs and flows of certain politics in the world.
However, we should probably mention that should the worst thing happen in the US and NASA be dissolved, we would have a lot of new friendly colleagues. So yeah, bring it on.
Okay, thank you.
Good morning. I wanted to know what was the most exciting thing you experienced while you're working for ESA?
Okay, I mean, for me, the most exciting part for me was, it wasn't launch, actually, of our mission. It was when we arrived at Mars, and the spacecraft burns its main engine for 2 hours in order to slow down and enter orbit. And if any interruption to that engine burn at all, any kind of problem on board, and you're not entering orbit, you're flying straight past and away, and you're not going to Mars today. And that engine burn, a large part of it happened in the radio shadow of Mars. We had no visibility at all of the spacecraft. So you see the spacecraft disappear, you sit back for an hour, 2 hours, and just wait and keep your fingers crossed. And the most exciting part for me was when it reappeared right on time, which meant that it had completed its burn successfully and we had a mission. That was the most exciting day for me.
I mean, I think for me it was probably last year. We've been on Mars Express. We'd had this problem where the gyros were dying, and we realized that we'd got about 12 months to save the mission, and this required completely rewriting the flight software in a way that had never been done before, with a very small team pretty much working non-stop. You know, I think the last like 3 weeks of it, I don't think I spent a day out of work. And then, very similar to Chris, that to do this, you have to reboot the entire, to install it, you have to reboot the whole spacecraft, which we're rebooting a system that hasn't been restarted in about 12 years on software that we've effectively written ourselves. And on top of that, we didn't know for certain that we had enough fuel to survive the reboot. And so when you see the little radio signal sort of gradually dropping as you lose the signal as the spacecraft switches off, and then you've got this 45-minute wait whilst hopefully it restarts and comes back. And there's a lot of pacing. We were basically mainlining cups of tea in the control room. We were sitting there waiting for this thing to happen. And then when you saw this sort of peak slowly sort of rise up on the display that the signal was there, and then the first burst of telemetry comes through telling you it's okay. That was pretty good.
For me, actually, I think there are three, and I really have problems to order them. The first of them is when the Rosetta lander touched down. It's actually very happy and terrifying memory at the same time, because I was monitoring the lander, and it clearly touched down, and none of the alarms I had set to confirm anchoring on the ground triggered. So within seconds, I went from, we landed, to, oh my God, it's still flying. And we didn't know where. We didn't know if we would come back on the comet. So, I mean, that was really an extraordinary moment. Then after that, there's the day after, because of course, so the lander rebounded 3 times on the comet, and eventually it settled somewhere, but that was around the time when we lost contact with the lander. So we went home, the night shift took over, and when we came back the next morning, we were supposed to have another contact with the lander, but of course we didn't know if it would happen, because we didn't know where the lander was. So we were all there sitting in the control room, waiting, and within seconds of the expecting AOS acquisition of signal, the lander said, yep, hello, I'm here. And that was just unbelievable. We were already so unsure that this thing would safely reach the comet. And not only did, but the day after, it was still there doing science. That was unbelievable. And then the last one is almost a year and a half later, when we actually got this picture that our scientific camera on board had found the lander, because we had been flying over the comet, desperately trying to find it and not being able to find it on the comet. And then suddenly, it was a morning, my colleague gave me a phone call and said, oh, you have to come over, there's something you have to see. And we had this fantastic picture where we could so clearly see it on the comet. It was absolutely fabulous.
So, I think we'll move on to the next question to give everyone a chance to ask. So the light's moving that way. Good morning.
Hi. Thank you for being here. I'm trying to get my question in a straight line. A couple of years ago, about 2 or 3 years ago, I was at Kennedy Space Center, and the NASA people there told us that they have some kind of countdown, like some kind of timetable when the first manned mass mission is scheduled, and it gets pushed back every time their fundings are cut. And I think at that time it was around 2035. So can you tell us or me, if everybody else already knows, what the status is on that?
I think it's a very difficult one. I think most of us will know that I've been in the space industry now 15 years, and the manned Mars mission has always been 15 years away. Every year I've been there, so and it still kind of is. I mean, it's certainly a target. It's the easiest planet for us to send people to, which is why it's a target, and it's also a very interesting planet, as my Mars colleagues will no doubt know. But yes, the problem is the technology is very complicated, but the money and the political will, that's the challenging thing. And sadly, there's a finite amount of it, and we have other challenges here on Earth, so that's what makes it very, very difficult to forecast. But I'm sure my colleagues from Mars can tell you a bit more about the technical reasons why it's such a big challenge and why it's always 15 years away.
Yeah, I mean, I think there was a report out a few months ago, wasn't there, that was suggesting the earliest that we could realistically do it would be around about the mid-2030s. I think the thing with going to Mars is it's not just like going to the moon but further away. That's a very fundamentally different challenge. There's a lot of stuff that you just didn't have to deal with the lunar missions that you will do going to Mars. And in some respects, Mars has pretty much it's the closest planet to get to in terms of being able to send people to it, but it's got almost the worst of everything that you could possibly want. It's got an atmosphere that's thick enough that you need a decent heat shield to punch through it, but then once you get through it, the atmosphere is too thin that you need a very big parachute to be able to sort of safely slow the thing down. Its day-night cycle is 37 minutes longer than the Earth's, which is sort of doesn't sound like much, but if you're trying to coordinate operations on Mars from the Earth, that will eventually become very difficult. The range of temperatures it has to deal with, it's not sort of either always really cold or always really hot. It's kind of somewhere in the middle, so you've got to be able to deal with that. It has weather that's kind of, the abrasions that you get from the dust. We don't really know exactly how that's going to affect equipment long term yet. That's one big challenge we need to understand. So
and communications is another problem as well. So for getting to the moon, you've got a round trip delay of just a few seconds, but for Mars, it's anything up to 20 minutes one way. So yeah, more than 40 minutes two-way. So if you have a problem, you call ground control. You've got enough time to sit down, watch an episode of Star Trek, and wait for your answer before you'll hear anything back. And if things are in an emergency situation, that's going to be a problem.
And from a planetary perspective, there's an abundance of challenges as well. Currently, I mean, if we're talking about landing humans on Mars, all of the places that could best support life on Mars, so the places that have water ice resources or different minerals that could be used to make buildings or fuel. These are currently protected areas. The areas that could most fully support human life on Mars are the ones that are most likely to have microbial life on Mars. So we actually can't land in those areas right now. Furthermore, these places with abundant water ice are at higher latitudes, which is harder from a missions and landing and operations point of view.
Cool. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, hello.
Good morning.
One of the problems of deep space travel is lack of gravity. Is there any research or progress done on the field of artificial gravity that would allow people to kind of stay healthy on such long travels?
Yes, I mean, artificial gravity through technology is still something of a sci-fi dream rather than anything we've got reality with. That said, we know very well that we can create gravity by spinning up the spacecraft or spinning part of the spacecraft.
Or accelerating and then decelerating. So.
Indeed, yeah. So So artificial gravity is really something we can trick artificial gravity by indeed spinning or accelerating. And I believe.
Yeah, I've also seen recently quite an interesting experiment where the idea was not to spin the spacecraft, but to spin the astronaut.
We love spinning astronauts.
Oh yeah. So basically you had a centrifuge machine and the astronaut was lying in it, and the idea was to create a rather high gradient of gravity on his body. So the head was still around 1g, but the feet were almost around, I can't remember, 6 or 7g. And the idea is basically to force the heart to work harder to try and counteract the effects of of 0g.
Thank you very much.
Hello, and thank you again for showing up here. It's always great to have ESA here.
Thank you for having us.
And my question would be, a lot of times when I try to talk science with people, or also science fiction, they say that they're not that interested in it because has a lot to do with math. So in school, we basically, no matter which science subject you have, you basically just do math. So my question to you would be, how much of what you're doing is actually more like abstract thinking, and how much is really just hard math?
Well, I work with software, so I do a lot of abstract thinking, but there's no math. So, well, I have the computer to do the math for me, so I have to know if it should calculate something, and then it does the calculation, so that's nice. But yeah, go into computer science, and there will be very little math.
I am.
Good choice. Come work with us.
If I can say, that question is awesome. Also, to those people who tell you that there is math involved and therefore it's uninteresting, ask them if they ever needed a lawyer. Ask them if they ever actually tried to communicate with anyone, because statement logic is part of mathematics. The very fact that we are exchanging facts between ourselves is mathematics, if you grind it down to the bottom core of what we do. We do mathematics all the time.
Also, in terms of fixing a lot of computer problems on board spacecraft, generally involves switching them off and back on again. So that's a large part of the job.
But we've got a better term for it. We call it power cycling, so we sound clever.
Yeah, it's completely different to turning it off and on again. It's spelt differently. It's.
I will say, as far as mathematicians go, we do have an entire building full of ultra-hardcore mathematicians, which is our flight dynamics department. And they're the guys who calculate what orbit we're in, work out what orbit we need to be, and what maneuvers we need to do to reach the orbit that we're after. They're the ones who manage to do all the mathematics for rendezvousing with a comet, for error braking, for ExoMars. So we do have mathematicians who are extremely good, but that's not us.
I think that's the big thing as well, is just to say there are jobs that need maths, but there's such a wide range of people that make up the European Space Agency and the space industry around the world. It's not even just scientists and engineers, although we're very pro people studying STEM subjects, but we have communications people in terms of public relations. We have lawyers that have to do our legal thing. We have people that deal with the politics that happen at ESA. We even have, for the space station, interior designers, because they found that the astronauts didn't respond well to just clean white walls, so they had to work out the best colors for the floor and the ceiling, even though there is no floor and ceiling. So there's a really wide range of jobs that go to make space happen.
Thank you very much.
That's a cool question. Thank you.
Hi. So actually, I think my question was just addressed by the lady's question right there, but I have another one. So I'm sure it's a question that you get a lot. A lot of people think that space exploration isn't worthwhile, that it costs too much money, that money should be better spent on Earth and stuff like that. What do you usually tell those people? Because I'm sure it comes up a lot when you talk about your job.
I'm going to give the really political answer, and then I'm going to let everybody else give the interesting answer. We actually had a big study in ESA very recently about how much space actually costs, and most Europeans think that they spend about 270 euros of their taxpayers' money every year on space. Actually, you all only spend 10 euros, and with that we go to the planets, we look after our planet here on Earth, we look out to the far universe, we come and bring you great posters here at FedCon, so actually, in the great scheme of things, it's really great value for money, but that's the really boring political answer, and I'm going to let the more interesting people talk about the fun bits.
So when I was studying Mars, my background was geophysics and glaciology, and I was studying glaciers on Mars by visiting glaciers on Earth that were analogous to the ones we saw on Mars, and using those to better understand past Martian climate. So in tandem with studying an entirely different planet nowhere close to Earth, I was developing our understanding of glaciers on Earth. So to think that our understanding of the solar system doesn't help or come back to us, I think isn't seeing the fuller picture. And then now, especially since I've moved from Mars to Earth observation, I mean, my work is directly relevant to climate change. So space does help our planet from a scientific point of view.
Then also, maybe from a more economic point of view, the purpose of the agency is actually to develop new technologies and then to redistribute them to all the European members. So the idea is not that we build spacecraft and we invent new technologies and then we keep it for us, just, you know, as a treasure. It's actually to redistribute it, to redistribute this knowledge all around Europe. And I think it's also very, very important that anyone who joins ESA as a member actually benefits from it, because the research that everyone does together goes much, much further than what you could do alone in your corner.
Also, to give a more specific example, remember the forest fires in Sweden last summer? Well, thanks to the Copernicus program, we had almost real-life data on how it was spreading, where it was dangerous to go, where it was safe, where help was needed. So there is, if nothing else, the Copernicus program actually saved lives last year.
I mean, I would give a more simple example, and that's just that I don't want to live in a world where somebody's, where children are in school and they say, "What's Mars like?" And the teacher goes, "Huh?" Costs too much to find that out.
Once again, I think Chris wins the answers, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
Good morning. Nice to have real space experts here at FedCon. I'm bold. I have two questions. First of all, recently Elon Musk sent 60 satellites up there. Isn't it getting crowded up there with all those satellites? There's a chance of collision of satellites. And my second question is, has ESA and also NASA a role to advise world countries, governments, etc., about climate change? Because now we have a world leader, maybe the biggest leader of the world, who denies climate change.
Okay, so I'm going to take the first question because we have to deal with space debris every day. Flying around Earth, it's a daily problem. We get warnings every single day and at the weekends about something coming, and on average we maneuver our spacecraft about once every 2 months. We actually have to light the engines and move out the way of something. It's a real issue, not just an issue because these warnings usually come in at about 3 a.m. on a Sunday morning, which is not when you want to go to work, but it's becoming a bigger and bigger problem, and mega constellations like Starlink, although that's one of many planned major constellations of thousands of satellites, do pose a big risk, and many of them are trying to be good actors in space, but we keep trying to get the message out that deorbiting your satellites are at the end of life. They do have plans with Starlink to do that, but these sorts of things are very, very important to try and keep space clean. although in fact we entered something called Kessler syndrome. We entered it actually a few years ago. It's a chain reaction, which is when one satellite gets hit by a piece of space debris, it explodes. And it explodes into thousands and thousands of fragments. And each of those fragments has enough energy. You can see on our stand what a fragment can do to a spacecraft. It has enough energy to destroy another spacecraft. And when it hits that one, that will explode and create thousands of fragments. And this will propagate. And we've actually already entered that scenario. In 100 years, even if we were to stop launching anything today, low Earth orbit would be completely unusable. So we need to actually turn that around and do something about it. And in fact, at ESA, we're starting a program soon to try and go up there and get the big bits. Getting the small bits is very difficult, but if we can start removing the big satellites, the big dead satellites from those orbits, then we take away those time bombs, those risks of explosion, and we get things back. But of course, with Starlink and with all the other mega constellations, they need to be really careful about being good users of space. There are very good guidelines now from the United Nations about how to be a good, clean user of space, and we all as a space community need to keep an eye on each other to make sure we stick to those rules, because otherwise we can't fly anymore, and we love doing that. But that's part one of the question. I think for climate change, Cassie's doing a talk later today, so I'll hand over to her.
Yeah, I was just going to plug my talk. Later today, 7 p.m., I'm going to be talking about Earth observation satellites and climate change. And yeah, trying to answer some of the hard questions surrounding that.
Thank you.
Hello. Nice to see you up there. I would like to ask more of a personal question, if I may.
Please do.
Yeah.
Okay. I watched The Big Bang Theory, and in one of the episodes, Raj had to handle a difficult situation when he was waiting for a satellite they had launched years before to respond. And you've already been talking about that, that your job involves a lot of waiting. How do you cope with that? Do you have to go to therapy? Do you go to temple?
I think we just learn patience. It's easier in the sense. Okay, let me start from another angle. With Rosetta, the worst part was the wake up when we had 45 minutes one way. So we had to wait an hour and a half when we sent a command to see the answer, which seems really, really, really a lot. But it actually comes gradually, because when you launch, your spacecraft is just next to the Earth, so you don't wait. And as days pass, it's a bit longer and a bit longer. It's a bit the story, we talked about it this morning actually, of the frog that you put in the cold water and then you slowly heat up and the frog won't move. And we're basically the frogs. The heat gets warmer and warmer and we just get used to it. To some extent, what I find more difficult is when this time comes back down. Because when you have 45 minutes, you send the command, and you know you've got time to go for lunch and come back. And then after some time, suddenly, well, you have to have a quick lunch, and then it has to be just a burger, and then you just have really time for coffee, and then you barely have time to go to the bathroom. So you get used to it, I think.
Yeah, I mean, I thought also as well is that we rehearse it a lot. So there's a lot of simulations and training and stuff that you go through. So it's not like it's very rare that you're doing something completely for the first time. So you kind of, the idea is that they basically train it out of you.
I can say that before I joined European Space Operations Center, I worked on a development project actually for close to a decade in Denmark in the Danish National Space Institute. And I find the pace of events where there is this rush to do something and then boredom for some time and then rush again much easier to cope with than sitting in an office for 8 years designing the same thing. It really ate my soul. It's much easier to cope with this, trust me.
I think, yeah, for me, it's easier doing the waiting when you're doing the simulation than it is in real life, for sure. It's a learned skill. It's something that you gradually get, you build up and you get used to it. Also, for critical operations, often we're working in 2 shifts of 12 hours each. So by the time it gets to the really critical part, you're so sleep deprived that you can't think straight anyway. That's a good question. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Hi, thanks for being there. I have a question about the Moon Village. I've heard that it should be established in a few years. How far did these plans grow? And when do you expect that there will be Europeans on the moon?
It's a bit like the Mars question. It's always a very difficult one to answer. You know, probably everybody knows, we definitely know how long space projects can take, and that the technology is really cutting edge. Actually, our current plans for the moon are something called the Lunar Gateway, which is a mission that we're doing with the US, with NASA, and with various other international partners. The idea is that we'll create a small space station, much smaller than the International Space Station, but in lunar orbit, and that'll be able to go closer and further from the moon, and indeed support landing missions to the moon. In terms of a firm plan with timescales, we don't have that yet. We're learning from previous projects to take things one step at a time, and so the current step is to get this Lunar Gateway there, and we're making quite a lot of progress with that. In fact, quite recently, one of the European components, which is the service module for the Orion spacecraft that will travel out there, that's the taxi that gets us to the moon, and that was moved from Bremen over to the United States to start doing the testing with the capsule, which is being built in America. So progress is happening, but like with everything in space, progress is slow, and that's not because we're lazy, it's because the technology is just so advanced that we want to get it right, and we want to do a good job, and if that takes a little more time, I think we'd rather do that, but do it right. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Hi. So I have a question, we are here at the FedCon, and I wanted to, I wanted to know, I don't know how many of you watch science fiction, but if you watch it, do you ever think, oh, this is very possible, or this is not something that will ever happen, or it will take forever to be developed?
Yeah, I mean, I think we've got, one of the reasons, we're quite big fans of The Expanse, and I think specifically for that reason, that there's, you've got the propulsion system that they use is kind of the bit of magic to make the show work.
I believe that's the Epstein drive.
Gold star for Chris. But the idea that, we have to deal with the zero-G problem, so we'll make it, we'll accelerate the ship, and just, the idea that out in the asteroid belt, that the single most precious thing that you can have is water, and the idea that, they live off basically sort of plant-based proteins, because, you're not going to herd cattle on an asteroid. That doesn't really make sense, but that's certainly a show that we quite like for that reason.
I mean, science fiction is a big part of why I got into this job. I wanted to do this ever since I was a kid, just because I watched too much Star Trek: The Next Generation, which is full of, yeah, exactly, TNG represent. And The Next Gen is full of, it's got artificial gravity, warp drive, subspace transports, it's full of stuff that is, physically, if not impossible, then incredibly difficult or implausible. But that doesn't matter when you're sitting down to watch a sci-fi show. I think the only time I've ever watched science fiction and gone, that's ridiculous, and laughed out loud is Gravity, which is, I love that film, it's a brilliant film, But when George Clooney says, we need to get to the space station, it's over there. And they just fly to it. That's the only time I was like, no, hang on. No, that's not how that works.
In defense of gravity, what damage the space debris does to the ISS, that's what we fear every day.
Well, personally, since I'm a software person, I would really like a universal translator, because I cannot imagine how you can build one and not cause constant misunderstanding. It's very hard, and culture is weird. So, yeah, I would like one, please.
Thank you.
Hello, good morning. Thanks for being here and answering our questions. Recently, people have always been talking about Mars and Moon and all this stuff that's going on at the moment. So I would like to ask about other missions you have at ESA, especially the one to Mercury, and maybe summarize what this mission is about and what is so interesting in Mercury.
Well, I think that being product assurance representative for Bepi Colombo gives me a chance to rant. Right now, yes, we have launched a spacecraft that will eventually reach Mercury in 7 years from now. We launched it last year in October. Its name is Bepi Colombo. It's, you can actually come to our stand and have a look at it. We have a big backdrop with its picture. It's a very special spacecraft because it has rather groundbreaking technology on board. It has the ion propulsion. It also is quite groundbreaking in the collaborative effort between ESA and JAXA, the Japanese space agency, that provided that top of that. I don't know if you have seen the pictures before, but it's sort of a snowman configuration, and the bottom part is the transfer module that will get us to Mercury. Then it will split up in 3 parts. That middle part is ESA's scientific thingy, and on top we have a cone that is hiding the Japanese module that will split up and start rotating to keep itself cold.
It's basically 3 spacecraft in one. It's
Yes.
quite an unusual configuration. As Jana says, you've got basically the tug that basically with the ion engine that takes it to Mercury, and then you've got the ESA orbiter and the NASA and the JAXA orbiter. The challenge actually with going to Mercury though is that not only it's close to the sun, so it's going to be very hot, but from a thermal protection point of view, it's really difficult because you've not only got the sun baking you, Mercury's very reflective, so you've got all the heat coming off Mercury as well. So, for example, the next mission that we will be launching is Solar Orbiter, which is going inside the orbit of Mercury to image the sun. And in some respects, that's a little bit more simple because it's got a huge lump of titanium on the front of it and then little doors in the sun shield that the instruments poke out of, whereas Bepi Colombo is getting baked from both sides. And in fact, both of them have the challenge that they struggle to generate enough solar power, which sounds quite weird when they're that close to the sun, but the simple fact is that you can't turn the solar arrays edge onto the sun because they'll just melt. And so you're having to you've got these huge solar panels and they're having to run them at a very, very oblique angle, which means that to keep them in good condition, but then that means that they can't run all the instruments at once.
Well, hilariously, shortly after launch, we have found out that Bepi was cold because, of course, everything is over-designed to the hot side, and being just launched from Earth, it was a chilly night, and things happened, and the spacecraft was a bit colder than we expected. And since it will take us 7 years and multiple flybys of several planets to get to Mercury, I'll come back to that why, we actually had to switch on more heaters than we expected, and we had to somewhat rotate the solar arrays a little bit more towards the sun, but it was by 1 degree or something like that. But the decision had to be made. It was hilarious that instead of almost not seeing sun, we're still almost not seeing the sun. And why it will take us so long. It would seem easy to fall into the sun, but the energy to slow down from Earth's velocity to actually gradually fall through the first few planets' orbit in the solar system and reach Mercury takes almost the same amount of energy as it would take to escape the solar system. Because slowing down or speeding up, it's the same, it's energy. And since we can't possibly afford to have a massive fuel tank and constantly blast, what we're using is the ion engine that is sort of a very weak but very constant push. And we're using multiple flybys of planets that will sort of take energy away from Bepi Colombo until it gradually reduces its orbit closer to the sun, and then it catches on to Mercury. After several flybys of Mercury, it will stick on and be caught by its gravity. Yeah. So it's a long journey ahead, and we're looking forward to it.
Good luck with that.
Thanks.
Thank you. So I think we have time for one last question here, but as you might have seen, don't worry, we're outside the hall here all the way through until the end of Monday. So if you have any more questions, please come by and talk to us. We've really loved having you, so please go ahead.
Thank you. No pressure. In the movie Sunshine, there's one scene where the action and everything that's going on there practically stops, and everyone just watches the beautiful Mercury transit before the sun. Did you experience any moments where you just stopped and watched something beautiful happen right in front of you on the screens you were watching?
I think the problem for us is that we receive the science data at such a low rate that you don't have real-time video from your spacecraft. So I think for us, the closest moment would be seeing, like for me, seeing the first image that we got from our spacecraft of Mars is one of those stop and take a breath moments.
I think somehow having a nice spectrum of a spacecraft coming back after an eclipse is beautiful. It's just a shaky line, really. But for us, it's beautiful. But from the work point of view, it's true that the visibility we have is not pretty. It's just lists of parameters and numbers, really.
Yeah, we get excited by data, so even just seeing the data is enough to make us stop and be amazed by it.
Well, this is not really about a mission, but which I find really cool is that you can actually see the ISS with your bare eye from the ground. So there's apps outside on the web. You can just download the app and it will tell you when you can see the ISS and which way to look. So I really recommend that because it's really cool, because it's a space station. It's flying around the Earth. We put it there and you can see it. It's so cool.
It's fantastic. We're doing that regularly.
And one final one for me is very much that we have on Mars Express what we call the Mars webcam, the visual monitoring camera, which was originally intended to image Beagle 2 as it departed the spacecraft, and it's now been repurposed into a science instrument. But we've managed to rig it up, because it's a simple camera, that the processing is all automatic. So as soon as images come in, they get processed, they get uploaded to an FTP server where people can download them, and it has its own Twitter account, so it sends tweets out automatically. And all of us on the flight control team have got, alerts set on these tweets, because, you see the new pictures coming in straight away. So it's, at ESA Mars webcam if you want to follow it.
So, thank you very much.
Thank you.
So thank you for all the amazing questions. It's been great, and thank you for the amazing questions at the stand. That's not the last of us. If you're not sick of us, we've got a panel from our senior science advisor, Mark McCaughrean, at lunchtime over in Beethoven. At 7 o'clock, you can listen to Cassie and I talking about climate change and Earth observation. And then tomorrow lunchtime, you get all these lovely people here to tell you what it's like to actually fly to Mars. So if you're not sick of us, come and see us.
Cool. European Space Agency. Thanks, guys.
Vielen Dank, dass ihr euch das Video angesehen habt. Wenn es euch gefallen hat, dann lasst einen Daumen nach oben da. Hier habt ihr nun verschiedene Auswahlmöglichkeiten. Ihr könnt oben links unseren Kanal abonnieren, oben rechts geht es weiter zu tollen Videos von diesem Event. Unten rechts gelangt ihr zur Internetseite vom nächsten Event. Zu guter Letzt kann ich euch noch den Space Store empfehlen. Hier gibt es alles Mögliche an Fanartikeln zu euren Lieblingsserien und Filmen. Bis demnächst auf diesem Kanal.